Droids are a staple of the Star Wars universe, and battle droids in particular are a staple of the Clone Wars era. Any Star Wars fan is at least familiar with the droid army of the CIS and the iconic B-1 battle droid, and we've discussed the Confederacy's battle droids many times on this channel. But the CIS was far from the first faction to use droids as its primary foot soldiers. The history of battle droids in Star Wars Legends stretches back tens of thousands of years, and in this video, we'll be exploring it from beginning to end.
This video is sponsored by Factor 75, a service that's made my life less inconvenient and given me more time to make videos like this. Factor 75 allows you to get chef-prepared meals on the table fast with their ready-to-eat meals, eliminating the hassle of prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted and dietitian approved. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular choices like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Also, discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. The Protein Plus menu is perfect for me as I try and bulk up without having to spend an hour making a nice healthy meal. Instead, I can spend that time creating videos and working out. When things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Pause or reschedule your deliveries anytime. Skip the overpriced takeout trap. Factor 75 is cheaper and way more delicious. Get chef-crafted restaurant quality meals delivered right to your door. They're ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes, which means more time for you. And have I mentioned their extensive gourmet options? So what are you waiting for? Get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders using my link. Be sure to click the link in the description or scan the QR code with your phone.
Droids were the backbone of the Star Wars galaxy, an omnipresent underclass on which the galactic economy was built. Most beings across the galaxy could scarcely imagine life without droids, as they'd been so thoroughly ingrained into society for so long that they'd become a fact of life. For millennia, they played essential roles in manual labor, industry, scientific research, and domestic work, and from very early in their history, they had also been used for war. Battle droids aren't all that exotic of a concept. Once you've got a machine that can move and perform basic tasks autonomously, it won't be long before someone wants to strap a gun to one. But there's a difference between a battle droid and a simple war robot, and that difference lies in the nature of droids as a whole. Droids were differentiated from other, more ordinary kinds of robot by possessing a behavioral circuitry matrix, which gave droids self-aware consciousness. In other words, droids were sentient beings, and they were capable of genuine independent thought, not the simplistic imitations of independent thought produced by machine learning. This meant that, in the absence of the usual programming restrictions, droids were capable of the same range of thought and emotion available to living sentients, and even under the strict programming restrictions most droids were subject to, they were capable of thinking, feeling, and self-awareness. This makes a difference in combat. Combat performance hinges heavily on the combatant's ability to make split-second instinctual decisions in chaotic and unpredictable situations, and this puts effective, autonomous combat beyond the capability of simple pre-programmed robots or machine learning algorithms. To an extent, for a machine to be a good soldier, it must, to some degree, be conscious and self-aware. Of course, war robots were still built and could be effective on the battlefield when accompanied and directed by sentience, but they were incapable of replacing organic soldiers altogether, while battle droids were. Battle droids were part of the larger category of Class 4 droids, which describes all droids built for combat. Battle droids shared their class with security droids, gladiator droids, and assassin droids, but of all the Class 4 droids, battle droids were by far the most well-known. The first Class 4 droids were likely battle droids, and they first came into being thousands of years before the dawn of the Republic, not long after the invention of the most basic droids, when ancient warlords started strapping beam tubes to their binary load lifters and sent them forth to lay waste to the armies of their enemies. These primitive class 4s proved far tougher than organic soldiers, and they were capable of carrying more powerful weapons that were too heavy for ordinary meatbags. In the pre-Republic era, this led to a brief period where all major powers assembled droid armies to fight their wars before it became apparent that organic soldiers could outsmart, outmaneuver, and eventually defeat basic battle droids with relative ease. This was the start of a millennia-long arms race that will define our story, which saw battle droids grow more advanced and intelligent while organic soldiers learned new tricks to beat them, leading to a constant ebb and flow in the use of droid armies. Even during the periods where droid armies weren't popular, however, most galactic powers made use of battle droids in some capacity, with governments like the Republic employing them as frontline infantry, softening up the enemy for the more skilled organic units behind them to handle. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. We should start at the beginning, and that means going all the way back to the pre-Republic era. Republic historians tentatively place the invention of droids by the ancient civilizations of the human core at around 30,000 BBY. In the millennia immediately following this, labor droids became omnipresent in core world societies to the point that they were already thoroughly ingrained in the economies of most Republic founding worlds before the Republic was even an idea. War droids developed in the core at around this time as well, and it was from these early combat units that all later battle droids were descended. But the humans of the core weren't the first civilization to invent battle droids. That honor actually belongs to the Gree, who maintained massive droid armies at the height of the Gree Empire, deploying them for wars against the Kwa and the Rakata. The Gree completely automated their armies, deeming combat an unfit task for Gree, and in their time, their war droids were some of the most advanced in the galaxy. Most Gree battle droids somewhat resembled the later Droideka. They were typically tripedal, with hunched bodies and powerful Gree blast rods built into their arms and chins. All but one of the known Gree battle droid models were built according to this basic design, with only tweaks to various systems differentiating the droids from each other. These units all appear to have been designed as heavy infantry, capable of sustaining incredible punishment and dealing tremendous damage while being slow and clumsy. The only known Gree battle droid with a racially different design is the Research Battler, which was humanoid and much more agile. However, the Research Battler was only known to be produced by the Gree ship Grey Seacant during the Sith Wars, so it's unknown if it was actually employed by the Gree at their height. The Gree were the first known major civilization to amass a droid army, but they were far from the last. The Infinite Empire of the Rakata, which defeated the Gree Empire and enslaved the galaxy in the pre-Republic era, also made extensive use of battle droids, though the extent to which the Rakata automated their armies is unknown. The Rakata maintained a whole warrior caste, however, so they didn't exclusively rely on combat droids to do their dirty work. With that said, the incredible production capabilities of the Starforge allowed the Rakata to manufacture near infinite numbers of battle droids, so they did make extensive use of them, including as guards for important installations, as heavy infantry, and possibly as horde infantry as well. Of the Rakatan droid models we're aware of, the only one known to have been exclusively intended for the battlefield was the Annihilation droid XXR-3, an enormous tripedal tank droid armed with missile launchers. This was a one-of-a-kind unit, though the Rakata are known to have used other tank droids like it in their depredations. The other Rakatan battle droids we know of were both classes of defense droid designed to protect Rakatan temples from outsiders. These units, and possibly all Rakatan battle droids, were built with self-repairing nanotechnology that allowed them to keep functioning for thousands of years after the fall of the Infinite Empire, and they were also partly built with force-based technology, as with most Rakatan creations. These units were sophisticated enough to match the capabilities of Clone Wars era combat droids, which is impressive for such ancient units. There are two known classes of Rakatan defense droid. One was encountered by Republic forces during the Battle of Honega. This unit scuttled around on 6-bladed legs, but it had a vaguely humanoid torso and head with arms tipped with beam tubes. The more common Rakatan Guardian droid, on the other hand, was completely alien in design. These droids were supported by 4 rail-tin spiked legs, insectoid in appearance, and their chassis were cylindrical and featured rotating segments. These droids each featured a single photoreceptor and a primitive blaster mounted right next to each other, as well as concealed weapons like flamethrowers or carbonite projectors built into the chassis, all of which had 360 degrees of rotation. Non-combat variants of these droid were used as personal assistants, and while most combat models were tasked with defending key positions, they were also sometimes used as horde soldiers. Notably, the Starforge was able to produce these droids incredibly quickly, and it could generate endless hordes of these units to overwhelm enemies as a last-ditch defense mechanism. All of these battle droid designs were lost with the collapses of their respective empires, however, and much of the technology involved in their construction became obscure. Rakatan droid designs did have an influence on the early droids of the human core, but for the most part, ancient humanity developed droids on its own, and the early Gree and Rakatan models ended up as a historical footnote rather than as a major evolutionary step in the history of battle droids. All of that is less true for the pre-Republic era's most infamous model of battle droid, however, the war droids deployed by Zim the Despot in his campaigns against the Hutt Empire. These were the war droids of the Guardian Corps, the most elite of Zim's soldiers, with which his empire subjugated hundreds of worlds before dashing itself into pieces against the armies of the Hutts. These machines were an engineering masterpiece, combining Taiwanese human technology with the techniques of cast-off Rakatan machinists, and they were millennia ahead of their time, towering juggernauts that made up the first droid army known to modern galactic civilization. Standing at nearly 2.8 meters in height, these battle droids were huge and devastatingly powerful. They were slow and lacked maneuverability, but they were incredibly durable, plated with layers of armor gilded with gleaming laser-reflecting Kyrium. Their joints were stiff due to reinforced armoring, but this was a trade-off that meant that the war droids completely lacked weak points, as their most important control systems were well protected. The droids' trunk-like legs and broad chests were especially durable. Zim's war droids were the first known humanoid battle droids in existence, with only their cranial turrets, which housed the droid's speakers and optical lenses, departing from the humanoid body plan. The Guardian Corps also included more advanced variants of the war droid, which were assigned higher ranks. These units were distinguished from standard corpsman droids by the color of the Death's Head emblem, the symbol of Zim's empire, that all of Zim's war droids bore on their chests, while basic corpsmen had white emblems and corps commanders, which had more sophisticated droid brains, had gold emblems. Zim's most elite war droids, the feared Crimson Condottiers, boasted blood-red Death's Heads. These units were built with force-energizing dynamos of Rakatan design. On their own, few of these traits were particularly significant. For the most part, Zim's droids weren't far off from the binary load lifters of the period. What made the droids different was their weaponry and their intelligence. Each of Zim's war droids was armed with a pair of forearm-mounted pulse wave cannons, incredibly powerful proto-blast weapons that were just starting to enter development at the time of the Zim Wars. Zim's droids also had particle discharges and heat beams built into their forearms. But much more important than this was the war droids' extraordinary intelligence and self-awareness. While some members of the Guardian Corps were little more than drones controlled from the transmission horns on Taiwanese command podiums, Zim's elite were far more sophisticated, capable of full consciousness, which was largely due to the use of Rakatan technology. Compared to more modern droids, of course, these units were still fairly basic, with unsophisticated behavioral matrices that led the droids to interpret all their commands literally. Zim's Guardian Corps famously fought in the Third Battle of Vontor, the last battle of the Zim Wars. There, they were ultimately defeated by the Hutts' slave hordes, but they slaughtered millions of Nikto, Klatooinians, and Vodrons before falling, making their mark on history in the process. Those war droids that survived the battle were taken as trophies by the Hutts, and they stood guard outside Hutt palaces and in public squares in the heart of Hutt space, even to the time of the Empire. By that point, most beings believed that the droids were defunct and simply decorative. However, they were proven wrong during the Yuuzhan Vong War, when the Hutts activated these 25,000-year-old war machines as a desperate last defense against the extragalactic invaders. And now, to move back to our main topic. After the Zim Wars, war droids fell out of use in the Tyon cluster, but the legacy of the Guardian Corps lived on, both in the popular imagination and in future generations of battle droids, which adopted design elements from the Despot's ancient robot legionnaires after the Tyon cluster was annexed by the Republic. For the next 20,000 years, which is to say the vast majority of Republic history, we don't know many of the details of battle droid development, though it's safe to say that as the years went on, battle droids became more compact, more agile, and more intelligent. We do have a handful of examples of battle droids from this period, however, which provide snapshots of how far droid technology had advanced. The ancient Sultan Nastunadon famously ruled the planet Morn with an army of exotic gearwork battle droids known as the Electric Caliphs, which were built circa 20,000 BBY. The specifics of the Electric Caliph's design is unknown, but their behavioral matrices were particularly sophisticated for such early models, and they were able to maintain themselves, a rarity even for droids of later eras, which allowed them to outlive their master and maker by 10,000 years. Despite their age, they were quite deadly, able to defeat even the ferocious Gargantels of Bos Pitti, which had previously crushed 7 armies of Nikto warriors that the Hutts had thrown at them. These ferocious battle droids were only destroyed when the Hutts employed Nimbanel lawyers to turn their own logic modules against them, as the lawyers successfully convinced the droids of their own obsolescence and instilled in them a sense of violent, suicidal nihilism. After the Nimbanel exploited this nihilism to turn the Electric Caliphs against the Gargantels, following which the droids completely exterminated the giants and left Bos Pitti a graveyard, the Electric Caliphs returned to Morn and set the whole planet on fire, destroying themselves and everything else on the world's surface. For most of the millennia that followed, most advancements in battle droid technology occurred under the purview of the Republic. As droids became more sophisticated and capable in combat, the Republic Army began to make use of various battle droid models to supplement the numbers of its organic soldiers. The most effective of these was the Juggernaut War Droid, the most advanced battle droids of their time, built to serve alongside the elite soldiers of the famed Republic Rocket Jumper Corps, which used jetpacks to drop from orbit onto the battlefields of contested worlds. Hastily commissioned in 4,800 BBY to aid the rocket jumpers in resolving the Gank massacres, the Juggernauts were durable, decently maneuverable, and equipped with powerful rocket packs, which allowed them to operate alongside their organic rocket jumper counterparts. They carried standard issue Republic pulse wave blasters into battle, and they were also armed with 2 built-in wrist-mounted weapons, a wide-beam sonic stunner used for subduing targets, and a shatter gun capable of tearing a Durasteel door from its frame, according to the new essential guide to droids. Most importantly, Juggernauts were exceptionally intelligent and independent. For centuries, Juggernauts were the pride and joy of the Republic military, but all that changed in 4015 BBY. That year, the rogue assassin droid HK-01 started the Great Droid Revolution, inspiring his fellow droids to rise up on thousands of worlds. On Coruscant, the Juggernaut war droids turned against their masters, massacring the rocket jumpers in a dramatic aerial battle above the government district. The revolution lasted for 3 months before being crushed by a Jedi task force led by Jedi Master Arca Jeth, and following it, the Juggernauts were all decommissioned and new restrictions on droid behavior cores were passed by the Senate, rolling back droid advancement and stifling development of droid intelligence for centuries. But while the Republic scaled back its use of battle droids following the Great Droid Revolution, not all of its enemies did the same. The infamous Basilisk war droids became the greatest weapons of the Mandalorians after the alien crusaders appropriated them during the devastation of Basilisk, and though these incredibly powerful war machines were more like mechanical cavalry than classical battle droids, they left their mark on droid history, as well as the scores of worlds the Mandalorians used them to conquer. The Krath war droid, produced just before the outbreak of the Great Sith War, was another example of a highly advanced early battle droid. These ferocious droids were built by the Krath, a Sith cult operating out of the Empress Teta system, and they were built to kill Jedi, the first known droids to be designed for such a task. Krath war droids weren't terribly bright, but they made up for this with incredible speed and dexterity, far eclipsing most battle droids of the time. Armored with ablative plating that made them extremely tough, Krath war droids were armed with built-in short swords and pulse wave bows, both unconventional but effective weapons. Krath war droids were capable of assimilating the battle tactics of their opponents, which was what allowed them to go up against Jedi. The Krath first deployed these droids in an assault on the Jedi Conclave at Deneba in 3997 BBY, at which the droids succeeded in killing many Jedi, among them the famed Jedi Master Arca Jeth, who had crushed the Great Droid Revolution. They went on to see extensive use in the Great Sith War, in which Krath war droids were deployed in vast numbers on the battlefield, overwhelming Republic forces. These droids were so effective that they remained a symbol of terror for millennia after the defeat of the Krath. Their design went on to influence later generations of war droids, as well as the design of General Grievous's cyborg body. The Great Sith War, as many of you probably know by now, was the opening salvo of a longer period of conflict known as the Old Sith Wars. During the next of these conflicts, the Mandalorian Wars, the Republic became desperate enough for reinforcements that it introduced battle droids into the ranks of the Republic army, even though the Great Droid Revolution remained in living memory. Battle droids ended up becoming a large and essential component of the Republic military during the Mandalorian Wars and Jedi Civil War, and the resources of the Republic were stretched to their limits. The Republic's enemies repeatedly came close to victory. The Republic made use of a wide assortment of battle droids during the Old Sith Wars. These each had different capabilities, but as a rule, they were generally simple-minded constructs due to the post-Great Droid Revolution restrictions on droid intelligence. Some Republic droids were little more than drones, and even the more sophisticated ones were placed under heavy programming restrictions. It was only after the end of the Jedi Civil War that those restrictions started to be loosened somewhat, but the rebellion of several highly advanced G0T0 infrastructure planning droids a few decades after the Civil War led to those restrictions being tightened even further. Most of the battle droids employed by the Republic in this era weren't humanoid. It's unclear if there was a specific reason for this, or if it was just an aesthetic choice. Non-humanoid Republic battle droids generally fell into one of two categories: patrol droids and assault droids. Patrol droids were typically small, repulsor-lift-driven units, with the Municipal Patrol Droid Mark I being an excellent example. This little droid consisted of little more than a repulsor lift unit, a cranial unit with sensor banks for surveillance, and a pair of maneuvering wings with pistol-grade blasters built into the tips. Republic forces used them to patrol military bases and battlefields, and while they were somewhat lacking in firepower, they made excellent sentries, able to perform reconnaissance duties with a lessened risk of detection. Assault droids were typically larger and much less subtle. There were three varieties of Republic assault droid, those being the Mark I, the Mark II, and Mark IV. These droids were designed by Zerka Corporation, and they all had particularly weird body plans. All three assault droid models sported heavy armor and were designed to be able to sport personal shield generators and concealed secondary weapons. They were unintelligent but powerful, conceptually comparable to the droidicas of the Clone Wars era. Assault droids were typically unsubtle and lacked maneuverability, but they could be much faster than their appearances would suggest. The Mark I assault droid stood on a single leg and used its two long arms to scuttle forward. Its head was long and drooped forward slightly. Its arms ended with huge, heavy metal hooks which the droid could use as melee weapons to pummel opponents with. These hooks could be flipped backwards to reveal the droid's built-in blaster cannons, which were its main weapons. The Mark II assault droid scuttled about on 4 insectoid legs, and it completely lacked blaster weaponry. It was primarily a melee attacker, and its main weapons were a pair of bludgeoning arms. Finally, there was the Mark IV assault droid, which was similar to the Mark II in configuration, except it was larger, lacked the bludgeoning arms, and was instead armed with a pair of heavy blaster cannons built into its head. All of these assault droids were primarily used to defend the Republic military installations, but they occasionally saw battlefield use as heavy infantry, sometimes alongside the Republic's massive Mark IV tank droids. There were 2 varieties of humanoid battle droids employed by the Republic forces during the Old Sith Wars, known as warbots and sentinel droids. Warbots were the older of the 2 models, distinguished by their bulky frames, rust-colored plating, and the sniper rifles that were usually strapped to their backs. The basic warbot model was unsophisticated and typically controlled by central computers on Republic dropships, but it could be extensively modified. The Sith of the Jedi Civil War, for example, were able to upgrade these droids to become capable, highly intelligent assassin droids able to kill Jedi. The basic Sentinel droid model was slightly more advanced and intelligent, but on the whole, it was similar to the Warbot, just with a more sleek design. Sentinels, like Warbots, were heavily modifiable, and they could be upgraded not only with advanced software, but also armor plating, personal shield generators, and concealed weapons, such as flamethrowers. In Republic service, both Sentinel droids and Warbots were typically armed with light repeating blasters and deployed en masse, sent in to soften up enemy positions before organic troops were deployed. These units were carried into battle by KT-400 droid carriers, usually to the parts of the battlefield with the fiercest fighting. They were simplistic and not all that tough individually, but they could be manufactured in vast numbers, and a large army of these droids could push back even Mandalorians and Sith. Sentinel droids were also effective as guards in Republic military installations, but it was on the open battlefield that they performed the best, leading the charge in the Battle of Duxon and many other bloody engagements of the old Sith Wars. Their use dramatically cut down Republic casualties, which may well have saved the entire Republic in both the Mandalorian Wars and Jedi Civil War, as Republic military had a severe manpower shortage in both conflicts. All of these Republic battle droids were a key evolutionary step in the development of battle droid technology. The Zerka assault and patrol droids incorporated state-of-the-art built-in blaster technology and personal shield generators, influencing a long lineage of heavy infantry droids that would eventually spawn the infamous droideka. The Republic's Sentinel droids and warbots, however, had an even more important impact. This impact was not technical, but strategic. In the Mandalorian Wars, the Republic adopted a quantity over quality approach to its droid infantry, using masses of battle droids to even the odds in its fight against the Mandalorians. These tactics were the first known interaction of the battle doctrine later used by the Separatist droid army, which gave up on attempting to build droids capable of matching human soldiers, instead of playing to the intrinsic advantages battle droids had over organics, their mass producibility, their resultant numbers advantage, and the ability to control and coordinate large armies of them with central computers. During the Jedi Civil War, the forces of the Sith Empire, which were primarily composed of deserters from the Republic military, made extensive use of all of these battle droid models, using them for much the same purposes as their Republic adversaries. The Sith took further advantage of battle droids' strength through use of the Starforge, which could produce near infinite numbers of battle droids at rapid speed, allowing the Sith to amass an inexhaustible droid army. Other Sith empires made extensive use of battle droids as well. During the Galactic Wars, virtually every faction in the galaxy made extensive use of battle droids, from the Republic and Sith to the Hutts and Zerka Corporation. Many of these droids shared similar body plans, being tripedal and boasting built-in blaster weapons. The true Sith Empire in particular made use of droids designed by the Colicoid creation Nest, the ancestors of the later droideka, in their armies. These Sith war droids scuttled about on 4 legs, and their arms ended in dual repeating blaster cannons. More advanced and heavily armored war droids were later used by the Sith in the sacking of Coruscant. Meanwhile, the Hutt Empire began experimenting with cores made from Isotope 5, a highly combustible substance mined on the planet Makheb, but the alleged destruction of the planet put a stop to that. The Eternal Empire, a quasi-Sith puppet state run by Darth Vitiate, made particularly heavy use of battle droids. The elite soldiers of the Eternal Empire's armies were the Sky Troopers, heavy humanoid battle droids armed with blast rifles, built-in flamethrowers, and rocket packs. These simple but effective units were a large part of the reason why the Empire was able to best both the Galactic Republic and the Sith Empire, despite starting out with just a scattering of planets. The Eternal Empire also made extensive use of the highly advanced Gemini droids, but those are a story in themselves, which we already have a detailed video on. As it had for most of its history, the Republic also continued to use battle droids during the Galactic Wars. During the Great Galactic War and the subsequent Cold War, the Republic favored GXR series droids, including the GXR-7 Sentinel, the GXR-5 Sabotage droid, and the fearsome GXR-7 Command droid. This tradition of the Republic using battle droids as an alternative to organics continued after the Galactic Wars too, though we have no information on the battle droids it used in its later conflicts. The Republic only stopped using battle droids at the end of the New Sith Wars, after which the Republic Army was dissolved. During the last millennium of Republic history, the only centralized military force the Republic had was the Judicial Forces, which were kept small and generally didn't use battle droids. This wasn't a hard and fast rule, however. In some instances, when the Republic seized private droid armies, the Judicial Forces appropriated some of the seized battle droids for use in certain operations, as was the case for some Trade Federation battle droids following the Battle of Naboo. On the whole though, Republic use of battle droids during this period was limited. Nonetheless, the golden age of the Republic saw marked advancements in battle droid technology, especially toward the end of the era, when private droid armies started to become popular again. An early and especially notorious pre-Clone Wars use of such an army came in the Kol Huro unrest, in which the warlord Mustag Olis, the dictator of the Kol Huro system, set out to conquer neighboring systems with a vast army of battle droids. The Jedi and the Judicial Forces crushed Olis's droid army before it could become much of a threat, but the conflict was more than it seemed. To quote the Essential Guide to Warfare, Olis's nascent empire was crushed by the Jedi Knights and the Judicial Forces, but the brief-lived incident puzzled Republic intelligence. The Jedi had faced a vast range of combat droids and droid starfighters, with no apparent rhyme or reason to what variety of mechanicals they might encounter at any one time. It was almost as if the entire war was a demented experiment in mechanized warfare. That is, of course, exactly what it was. Mustag Olis had been goaded into building his army by then Sith apprentice Darth Sidious, and the lessons learned from the Kol Huro unrest were used to build the droid armies used by Sidious's other pawns, who later went on to arm and finance the CIS droid army. This army, as some of you may know, battled the rebuilt Grand Army of the Republic in the Clone Wars. Before we move on to discussing the droid army, however, we have a few more battle droids to talk about. Because the Confederacy wasn't the only faction to use battle droids in the Clone Wars, despite relying mostly on the clone army provided by the Kaminoans, the Republic did actually continue its long-standing tradition of using battle droids in the Clone Wars. Granted, the Republic used battle droids far less than it had in previous conflicts, but even then, this was due mostly to appearances and concerns over public opinion than any tactical reason. In particular, the Republic used 2 models of battle droid during the Clone Wars, the SD-6 Hulk and the L8 L9. The SD-6 Hulk infantry droid was a product of Balmoran Arms, and the Judicial Forces had actually commissioned a small army of them shortly before the start of the Clone Wars. These 3.5 meter tall heavy infantry droids were tough and effective, equipped with starship-grade duranium armor and a fearsome arsenal of weapons, including a pair of arm-mounted E-Web blaster cannons, a pair of shoulder-mounted Merson ion rifles, and hands capable of crushing organic opponents. The SD-6 was virtually a walking heavy turret designed primarily to defend fortified positions, and it put the Confederacy's super battle droids to shame. At the start of the Clone Wars, the Republic initially pulled the Hulk from active duty, but this didn't last, especially as, once again, the Republic military found itself outnumbered on the battlefield. The SD-6 Hulk was redeployed as support infantry, seeing action on some of the Clone Wars' bloodier battlefields. They operated in a limited capacity due to the aforementioned PI issues and the fact that the Republic's clone troopers resented having to work with battle droids, but they were widespread enough that the Republic kept buying them from Balmoran Arms during the Clone Wars, even after Balmorra seceded and started selling droids to the Confederacy as well. The L8, L9, meanwhile, was a prototype battle droid designed by the Taggi Company, a loyalist megacorporation that had influence in virtually every galactic industry. This unit was far more maneuverable than the other droid models in use at the time, and it was far more intelligent than the Confederacy's droids as well, giving it a distinct edge in combat. Additionally, the L8, L9 was quite well armed. Its arms featured built-in plasma cannons and flamethrowers, while its finger blades, when spun rapidly, could cut through durasteel. The droid was designed on the orders of Baron Orman Taggi, the head of Taggi Co., in an attempt to curry favor with Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. The Baron's goal was to phase out the expensive clone troopers in favor of his battle droids, and he actually came close to succeeding, as the L8, L9 was capable of outperforming clone troopers. Fortunately for the clones, Taggi chose to test the L8, L9 by entering it into an arena on Rat Attack, and he had the misfortune to enter it into the arena battle that Ratataki warlord Asajj Ventress chose to fight in to prove her skills to Count Dooku. Ventress destroyed the prototype, costing Baron Tagger his contract and the 100,000 credits he had bet on the droid's victory. Were it not for Ventress, however, the Clone Wars may well have become the Droid Wars, as even against a fallen Jedi, the L8, L9 performed remarkably well. Of course, the real advancements in battle droid technology took place on the other side of the Clone Wars. In the final centuries of the Republic, several of the galaxy's most powerful megacorporations established their own private armies. Ostensibly, these were meant to be security forces, but in practice, they were also used to crush competitors, threaten debtors, and break strikes. Originally, many of these private armies were staffed with organic personnel, but in the wake of the Kol Hura unrest and the Stark Hyperspace War, many corporations instead began adopting droid armies to do their dirty work. This was mostly for two reasons. Firstly, droids didn't need to be paid, and secondly, droids were much less likely to object to the kinds of morally dubious missions the megacorporations were increasingly using their armies for. It helped, of course, that the Kol Hura unrest had provided these corporations, as well as the shadowy Sith urging them to expand their armies, with a wealth of data about the performance of numerous kinds of battle droids. The largest private droid army was amassed by the Trade Federation. The Trade Federation's paramilitary, the Trade Defense Force, had actually been a major part of its business model for some time. In the Republic's final centuries, many Outer Rim worlds were plagued by pirates, and the Trade Federation offered TDF assistance in battling the pirates to poor planets unable to defend themselves, in exchange for said planets essentially submitting to Trade Federation ownership. But the Trade Federation droid army was being built for a much different purpose. It was being built specifically to wage war, at the direction of Darth Sidious. This army was actually developed separately from the rest of the Trade Defense Force, and it was largely developed in secret. Furthermore, as we've discussed in the past, the whole army was essentially designed together, with each piece of the army designed to work smoothly with the rest. The various components of the Trade Federation droid army were produced by Bactoid Combat Automata, Bactoid Armor Workshop, and Hao Chal Engineering, all companies based in little regulated parts of the Rim. There, far from the watchful eyes of Republic regulators, they ushered in a new age of battle droid technology. Bactoid Combat Automata was responsible for designing the core of the droid army, the battle droids themselves. Bactoid's new B-1 battle droids were designed with the lessons of the Kol Hura unrest and the Republic's Mandalorian Wars era droid army in mind. the skeletal, little armored units were built to be as cheap and mass-producible as possible, allowing them to be deployed in staggeringly large numbers. Additionally, these droids were designed to be slaved to a central control computer, providing the entire army with incredible coordination. This was essentially the same approach the Republic had used in the past, except it was used for the whole army, not just the disposable first waves. The B-1 battle droid was simple but effective, armed with stripped-down blaster rifles and deployed in companies over 100 strong each. Their skeletal appearances, monotone voices, and complete lack of mercy evoked fear in their enemies and masters alike. Among the Neimoidians of the Trade Federation, it was rumored that the droids were designed to resemble Neimoidian skeletons, though they were actually just made in the image of their Geonosian creators. Individually, they weren't all that impressive, but they were never encountered individually, and what they lacked in armor and intelligence, they made up for with sheer numbers. They were quite maneuverable, though they rarely took full advantage of this, and they were designed so that they could easily be repaired or rebuilt when destroyed. When not active, B-1s could even fold up for compact storage or transport, allowing large numbers of the droids to be shuttled from place to place with ease. The Trade Federation's central control computers managed each B-1 directly, so Baktoid didn't even bother installing most B-1s with independent droid brains, allowing all units to be fully micromanaged by the supercomputer. This allowed all B-1s across an entire planet to operate with perfect coordination, a strength that even the most skilled of organic armies could struggle to overcome. All told, the Trade Federation's B-1 army was thus a force to be reckoned with, embracing an entirely new way to wage war. Though the Trade Federation heavily favored quantity over quality in its battle droids, it did also commission a number of tougher or more specialized droid units. OOM variant B-1 battle droids were equipped with more sophisticated programming that allowed them to specialize as pilots, security officers, and commanders, while Baktoid also built a small number of E-4 Baron droids for the Trade Federation. These towering, well-armored droids could be characterized as prototype versions of the later B-2 Super Battle Droid. They were tough, somewhat sluggish, and armed with built-in dual blaster cannons. The Trade Federation only used them sparingly, but when they saw action, they typically proved effective. Then there was the Droideka, perhaps the most feared battle droid of its time. These altogether alien units were designed by the Colicoid creation Nest, and the Trade Federation purchased a small number of them to supplement its droid armies in exchange for several barge loads of exotic flesh for the cannibalistic insectoids to devour. If the B-1 could be characterized as a modern version of the Republic Sentinel droid, the Droideka was a modern assault droid. These tripedal, hunchbacked units curled up to roll into battle at high speeds, and once deployed, they would act as semi-stationary smart turrets armed with a pair of powerful heavy blaster cannons. But the Droideka's most infamous feature was its powerful personal energy shield, which made it all but unstoppable. Fortunately for the Trade Federation's enemies, these droids were deployed sparingly. All of these droids worked in conjunction with tanks, transports, and airhawks built by Baktoid Armor Workshop, each of them designed to be operated by OOM pilots, as well as Hawor Chal-designed troopships and Vulture Droid starfighters, which were deployed from existing Trade Federation bulk freighters that had been secretly armed and converted into battleships. Many of these were new additions to the Trade Federation military, while others merely replaced the equipment the TDF used previously. Before the Vulture Droid, for example, the Trade Federation had used cheap snub fighters piloted by battle droids, which performed poorly most of the time. The new army was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and it was only a taste of what was to come. Of course, as we all know, the Trade Federation droid army did not meet expectations in its first major engagement. In 32 BBY, it was initially successful in invading and occupying Naboo following a Trade Federation blockade, but in the Battle of Naboo, it was utterly defeated by the Naboo and the Gungans with the help of a few Jedi. On the battlefield, the The Trade Federation's battle droids performed quite well against the Gungan army, even though OM9's forces were outnumbered by the Gungan warriors, but in the end, the entire droid army shut down following the destruction of the droid control ship, bringing a swift end to the Trade Federation occupation. Following the Battle of Naboo, Naboo urged the Republic to sanction the Trade Federation and implement new regulations on the creation of droid armies. The Trade Federation and its executives got away with a slap on the wrist, but the Senate did actually go through with regulating droid manufacturers and implementing size restrictions on private droid militaries. The Trade Federation droid army was forcibly disbanded, and its assets were seized by the Republic Judicial Forces. Bactoid Armor Workshop was publicly and dramatically liquidated, though its sister company, Bactoid Combat Automata, remained in operation as its existence wasn't public knowledge. To outside observers, it seemed that the Battle of Naboo had dealt a blow to battle droid production, as even the powerful Techno Union closed down dozens of droid factories dedicated to the production of combat models, including ones on Foundry, Ord Lythone, Balmorra, Telti, and Ord Cestus. But even the HoloNet articles promoting this narrative provided hints at what was really going on. To quote an article dated to 2 months before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, according to last year's annual statement, Bactoid is still pulling the same raw material figures, yet hasn't diversified its product, says business analyst Derek Hiat. We have a company that's spending, buying resources, but isn't making or selling goods. You can bet shareholders aren't happy. At the start of the year, Bactoid officials explained the increased purchases of raw mats as investments in future diversification, something that is yet to be reflected in the company's product catalogue. The late Senator Lanus Rede made headlines when he suggested that Bactoid was using said materials in secret Outer Rim plants, free from Republic regulations. Such claims were refuted by business analysts, as well as a 3-month investigation. The scandal amounted to an unrecoverable political blunder on Rede's part, which led to his suicide earlier in the year. Of course, as that definitely not suspicious suicide suggests, Senator Rede was right on the money. The Techno Union and its allies had simply relocated their facilities to worlds like Geonosis, Hypori, and Siskine, Outer Rim mech worlds beyond the borders of the Republic. There, as the Republic began to fracture and the Separatist crisis began, the Trade Federation and other megacorporations quietly began to rebuild their droid armies. The Techno Union, Commerce Guild, Intergalactic Banking Clan, and many others all built new droid armies based on the Trade Federation's model, using B1 battle droids according to a quantity over quality doctrine. These B1s were now equipped with droid brains that allowed them independent thought. This was only meant to be a backup mechanism in case a droid control ship were to be destroyed or disabled, however, and the quality of B1's independent thinking abilities was questionable, to say the least.
Look, it's RB551. No wonder he got blasted. He's one of those older models programmed by a central computer. Not us. We're independent thinkers. Roger, 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 roger.
But the B1s were also supported by additional battle droids and all manner of droid tanks, fighters, and auxiliary craft. The most important of these was the B2 Super Battle Droid, a new heavy infantry unit produced by Bactoid, which became an essential component of each of the corporate droid armies. The B2 was essentially an even tougher version of the Baron droid, with extremely heavy armor and powerful wrist-mounted repeating blaster cannons. They weren't as maneuverable, as fast, or even as intelligent as the standard B1s, but the B2s were formidable foes, a game-changing addition to the ranks of the droid army. Whereas previously hordes of B1s could be mowed down as they marched toward the enemy, now they sheltered behind the lines of tougher B2s, sniping from the rear, while the tougher droids soaked up fire and unleashed withering barrages from their blaster cannons. The B1s and B2s were supported by a vast array of specialized battle droids, some designed before the outbreak of the Clone Wars and some at the height of the conflict. The B2 was followed by the towering B3 Ultra Battle Droid, an enormous, heavily armed battle droid that functioned more as a light tank than an infantry droid, despite maintaining humanoid proportions. BX series commando droids bore a strong resemblance to the B1, but they were more agile, better armored, and far more intelligent, designed for special operations duties. Other specialized infantry droids included the BL series Battle Legionnaire, which were designed for the use of the Mandalorian protectors, the A series Aqua Battle Droid, designed to operate underwater, IG series Lancer droids, which were deployed for the defense of Munilance by the Trade Federation, and a whole slew of additional B1, B2, and Droideka variants. There were also battle droids produced for more specialized tasks. The Techno Union's rare CB3 Cortosis battle droids and Holo 1 Mechanical's IG-100 Magna Guards were both designed to fight Jedi, the latter with pre-programmed Jedi fighting techniques, Frick electrostaffs, and extreme dexterity, and the former with lightsaber-resistant Cortosis armor. Commerce Guild Chameleon droids were equipped with blending fields that allowed them to become invisible to the naked eye, while Colicoid Buzz droids wreaked havoc on enemy fighter craft by dismantling them mid-battle. And unlike with the Trade Federation's first droid army, the vast majority of support vehicles built for these new armies were droids themselves. Techno Union Crab droids and Commerce Guild Dwarf Spider droids acted as light vehicles on the battlefields of the Clone Wars, while Homing Spider droids, Hailfire droids, and Corporate Alliance NR N99s served as tanks. The Vulture droid, which had proven formidable in the Battle of Naboo, was joined by the Hyena Bomber and the fearsome droid Tri-Fighter, with the latter being the deadliest interceptor ever designed. When these private armies pooled to form the CIS droid army shortly before the Battle of Geonosis, they not only formed the largest droid army ever built, but the largest army of all time, and one that was unprecedented in the sheer diversity and specification of its droid units. Were it not for the Grand Army of the Republic, the CIS droid army could have crushed the Republic with relative ease. But the Kaminoan-bred, Jedi-led clone army deployed on the battlefields of Geonosis evened the odds, and as the Clone Wars escalated, the strength of the droid army was matched by the skill and determination of the Republic's clone troopers. Whereas the droid army was designed with an emphasis in quantity over quality, the clone army followed the opposite doctrine. It was constantly outnumbered, but its men performed exceedingly well all the same, defeating much larger droid armies in many battles over the course of the Clone Wars. On the whole, the Republic's clone troopers were superior to the Confederacy's battle droids, to say nothing of the Jedi, each of whom could cut through hundreds of droids without breaking a sweat. The superior skills and intelligence of the clones and Jedi led to numerous Republic victories, as did the Republic's superior industrial capacity, which, toward the end of the war, allowed Republic forces to achieve the upper hand. By the third year of the Clone Wars, the Outer Rim sieges were in full swing, and before long, the Confederacy was defeated. But this defeat was evidence more of Sith manipulation than the droid army's ineffectiveness. In fact, the CIS droid army won plenty of victories over the course of the war, in battles on worlds ranging from Jabim and Argonar to Antar IV and Duro. Particularly under the leadership of General Grievous, the droid army found regular success by following its doctrine of overwhelming force, as past a certain point, the sheer numbers of battle droids the Confederacy deployed were enough to overwhelm even the most skilled opponents, even Jedi. In fact, even though the Confederacy had far less industry to dedicate to the war effort than the Republic, you would never be able to tell without resorting to counting factory worlds. The efficiency of the droid designs used in the army allowed the Confederacy to do more with less. Even during the Outer Rim sieges, as the CIS began to hemorrhage territory, it was able to make do by setting up makeshift factories on remote conquered planets, which were still able to churn out vast numbers of battle droids with remarkable efficiency. Far from being a testament to the droid army's inferiority, the Clone Wars proved the frightening power of the Confederacy's army building model and of battle droids in general. But the manipulations of the Sith brought about the defeat of the droid army, and thus major setbacks for battle droid technology in general. The depredations of the CIS and the eventual Republic victory made even the idea of battle droids deeply unpopular for a while, and Republic propaganda kept most beings from seeing just how effective the CIS droid army had really been. To quote HoloNet pundit Hirib Basot, "We've invented a separatist threat that's bigger than the reality. The claim of quadrillions, quintillions, and even septillions of separatist battle droids is so ludicrous that we'd rush to debunk it if someone didn't have a vested interest in making us believe it. Nothing adds up. literally. Do you know how big a quadrillion is? Let's use the galactic standard notation. 1,000 million million. A quintillion? A million quadrillions. A septillion? A billion quadrillions. Any coalition capable of producing even quadrillions of any new machine could roll over the Republic in a few days. And the amount of materials and energy needed to produce and move even a quadrillion droids is immense. It would drain star systems. Either our government is composed of innumerate idiots, or it's inflating the threat way beyond the average citizen's math skills so that it can justify the war and where it's heading. For entirely unrelated reasons, Basot was found dead at his home not long after this broadcast. All of this propaganda painted the image of an enormous droid army that was utterly crushed by a thoroughly outmatched army of clones. And though the droid army did outnumber the GAR, in reality, it was the Confederacy that was outmatched in most aspects, and the efficiency of the droid army allowed it to grow to such enormous sizes and come close to toppling the Republic in spite of this. Ultimately, no other army would enjoy the ease of manufacturing, sheer numbers, and perfect coordination of the CIS droid army, and that model of battle droid production died with the Confederacy, never to recover. But that didn't mean the end of battle droid production altogether. Battle droids simply evolved in a different direction going forward. This progress was very slow, however, as droids of all kind were unpopular after the Clone Wars, and battle droids in particular were reviled and heavily regulated. The war caused droids to be associated with separatism and the atrocities of the CIS for decades to come, and as a result, even before the rise of the Empire, many loyalists had begun to distrust droids. This only worsened during the first years of Imperial rule, as the fledgling Empire justified its existence through years of war against separatist remnant factions. At the end of the Clone Wars, the CIS droid army was shut down by a master control signal sent out from the Separatist Council's bunker on Mustafar. All across the galaxy, the Confederacy's battle droids returned to their transports and deactivated. Most of these droids were subsequently seized by the Empire and scrapped, but not all of them. Some Separatist commanders fighting in remote parts of the galaxy were able to reactivate their armies before the Empire came knocking, and in other parts of the galaxy, entire warehouses full of battle droids were discovered by Separatist militants or underworld factions before the Empire. For years after the end of the Clone Wars, Separatist holdouts continued to make use of droid armies, and many other droids were stolen from Separatist warehouses and sold to crime lords for use as enforcers. These conflicts, which the Empire called the Reconquest of the Rim, were a cornerstone of early Imperial propaganda. Imperial citizens everywhere were subjected to endless broadcasts of Imperial clone stormtroopers and non-clone army recruits fighting battle droids and Separatist-aligned pirates on Imperial holovision, and even though very few Imperial citizens were even remotely threatened by the Separatist holdouts, Imperial propaganda was very effective at stoking the public's fear of battle droids to generate support for the government. Many Imperial Era wars began with some warlord reactivating an old Separatist droid factory and building a droid army, as was the case with Gaius Delso's brief rebellion, reviving public loathing of battle droids each time. The criminal underworld's use of salvaged Separatist droids likely didn't help much either. Many petty crime lords grew more powerful than they otherwise might have been through the use of reactivated B1s, B2s, or even BX commando droids. On top of this, the Empire's doctrine of human high culture not only preached that non-humans and cyborgs were inferior beings, but the droids were lesser and impure as well, inferior to human beings. Much like Imperial anti-alien speciesism, this was simple scapegoating, providing the oppressed peoples of the Empire with an even more downtrodden class to hate and lord their power over. All of these factors combined to create widespread anti-droid sentiment, and this was especially true in the case of combat droids. After all, trillions of people all over the galaxy had bad memories of the Separatists' battle droids, and thus any droid that as much as carried a blaster was viewed with suspicion, if not open loathing, on your average Imperial planet. Thus, the Imperial Era was a dark age for droids. The Empire couldn't phase out droids of its society entirely, of course. The economies of the core worlds would collapse in a day without droid labor. But droid labor was generally made less visible, and in the Outer Rim, droids were banned or placed under heavy restriction. Planets like Bakura required all droids on planet to wear restraining bolts at all times, while establishments like Chalmun's Cantina on Tatooine forbade droids from entering. Additionally, many Imperial officers, especially those who had fought in the Clone Wars, genuinely shared the anti-droid sentiments that Imperial propagandists were propagating, and they often went out of their way to minimize droid use in their commands. Military higher-ups largely tolerated basic utility and labor droids as a matter of necessity, but battle droids were still met with resentment even at the highest levels of command. The Republic had laws regulating private use and ownership of non-military Class 4 droids, but the Imperials dramatically ramped up these regulations, all but banning combat droids altogether. The production of battle droids was utterly quashed with only a few exceptions, and the advancement of battle droid technology stalled and was all but non-existent under the Empire. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, only two kinds of combat droid were still relatively commonplace: assassin droids and non-combat models that had gone rogue, such as 4 LOM. Battle droids all but disappeared, from the civilian galaxy, that is. Battle droids persisted, however, in the military sphere. The Empire being the Empire, it continued to use combat droids itself, and it actually ended up using many old Separatist battle droid models. Most Separatist droids that the Empire seized were scrapped, but a few were instead reprogrammed and put to use in the Imperial military. Some of these, most notably the B-3 Ultra battle droid, were exclusively used as targets for Stormtrooper recruits at Imperial military academies, but other former Separatist droids were made available to the Stormtrooper Corps for battlefield use. Droidekas were used as security for especially important Imperial installations, and were occasionally developed to support Stormtrooper squads in particularly heated ground battles, while DSD-1 Dwarf Spider droids were commonly used by the Stormtrooper Corps as mechanical attack dogs, assisting in the subjugation of many former Separatist worlds. Colicoid Scorpionic Annihilator droids were deployed on the secret Imperial throne world of Biss as palace guards, while Techno-Union Crab droids were used as sentries and scouts by the Imperial Army. The use of battle droids wasn't exactly something the Empire bragged about, for obvious reasons, but it was a fairly open secret, since Dwarf Spider droids in particular were especially prevalent in the Stormtrooper Corps. But the Empire wasn't content to just repurpose old Separatist battle droids. It actually commissioned battle droids of its own. Some factions within the Empire even tried to build Imperial droid armies, but these projects always faced an uphill battle within the bureaucracy, where Imperial battle droid projects were always looked down upon with disdain. While droid makers like Taggy Co were eager to start churning out Imperial battle droids from the beginning, the chilly attitude toward battle droids in the Imperial military made sure that dozens of Imperial battle droid projects never saw the light of day. One of the first of these canned projects was the Taggy Co ZX3 Droid Trooper, a spiritual successor to the L8-L9 battle droid that Taggy Co had pitched to the Republic during the Clone Wars. These droids were developed by the Droid Trooper Project, a joint effort between Taggy Co and Imperial military researcher Rom Mock that was started just a few years after the end of the Clone Wars, which had the goal of producing Imperial battle droids that could replace clone stormtroopers in hazardous environments. Indeed, the ZX3 Droid Trooper was perfectly capable of doing so. These tall humanoid droids were designed to look like droid stormtroopers, albeit with crimson plating instead of stormtroopers' stark white armor. The ZX3 was well armored, tough, incredibly strong, and pretty intelligent too, and it could operate effectively in high radiation or deep space conditions where stormtroopers typically struggled. They were typically armed with chest-mounted blaster boxes and handheld blaster rifles, and like the L8-L9 before them, they had a better average combat performance than the organic soldiers they were replacing. Taggy Co produced a set of 100 ZX3s for testing, and the droids surpassed the Imperial military's combat standards for stormtrooper recruits, proving pretty definitively that they would be better than Imperial clone stormtroopers. But the droids were rejected anyway due to prejudices within the bureaucracy, and the project was cancelled, with most of the 100 units in existence slated for the scrap heap. Only a handful of ZX3s made it out into the greater galaxy, one of whom ended up on the artificial satellite Kligson's moon, which he attempted to seize for the Empire in an ill-fated mutiny. The failure of the Droid Trooper project ended up being the last time Taggy Co would pitch an Imperial battle droid project, but their Imperial military collaborator, Rom Mok, wouldn't be so easily dissuaded. Over the course of the Dark Times, he became a general at the Imperial Department of Military Research, and he kept working on the next version of the Imperial Battle Droid, a combat droid that Mok believed would render organic soldiers obsolete. This initiative, which languished in obscurity for years before making several breakthroughs and receiving additional funding around the time of the Battle of Yavin, was called the Dark Trooper Project. The first round of Dark Troopers, classified as Phase 0 Dark Troopers by General Mok, were actually cyborgs, aging clone veterans who had been selected for enhancement. Mok's cyberneticists removed over 70% of these clones' organic tissue, replacing them with cybernetic enhancements. These half-droid super soldiers were the Dark Troopers you might remember from the classic Battlefront games, and they were undeniably effective, but they weren't without issues. Most of the clones that became Phase 0 Dark Troopers were unwilling participants, and the trauma of the enhancement process left them with serious psychological issues, ending in suicide or psychosis. The Empire retired the line as a result, ending the Dark Trooper project for a time. But Rom kept up his work, and by the time of the Galactic Civil War, he had developed the Phase 1 Dark Trooper, the first true battle droid the project had produced. These units were mostly a proof of concept, as shown by their skeletal design, but they were incredibly intelligent and packed full of unique abilities. They were equipped with built-in jump packs, blast shields, and vibroblades, and they were primarily made from Frick, the same hardy, lightsaber-resistant alloy used in the electrostaffs of General Grievous's Magna Guards. Phase 1s were limited in utility as they only carried melee weapons, but they only saw use as sentries in tests for Imperial higher-ups, and they were always pitched as a prototype, not a finished product. At any rate, the Phase 1 Dark Trooper was impressive enough that they won the Dark Trooper project the personal endorsement of Emperor Palpatine, who gave General Mok a massive boost in funding and command of the Arc Hammer, a massive spaceborne factory that would be dedicated entirely to the Dark Trooper project. There, Mok and his team improved upon the Dark Trooper design, coming up with the most well-known Dark Trooper model, the Phase 2 Dark Troopers. The Phase 2 Dark Troopers were among the most fearsome battle droids ever designed. Instead of a Frick exoskeleton, these droids featured heavy Frick armor, which evoked the design of Stormtrooper armor. This similarity was purely aesthetic, however. Dark Troopers were far more powerful than any Stormtrooper could ever hope to be. These droids were both durable and incredibly strong, and impressively, they were simultaneously very agile, with their built-in jetpacks allowing them to outmaneuver as well as overpower their opponents. Unlike the Phase 1 Dark Troopers, Phase 2s carried powerful handheld ranged weapons that could spray off up to 400 plasma blasts and 20 dumbfire missiles without reloading, which was enough firepower to annihilate entire rebel companies. As that description suggests, these droids were absolute tanks on the battlefield, powerful enough that not even Imperial bureaucrats could ignore their effectiveness. Phase 2 Dark Troopers were deployed from the Arc Hammer via hyperspace pods delivered directly to key targets across the galaxy. The droids were first deployed shortly after the Battle of Yavin, conducting an absolute massacre of rebel forces on Talay that won the Dark Trooper project the personal approval of Darth Vader. Urged on by Vader, Mok improved upon the Dark Trooper design even further, resulting in the deadliest Imperial battle droid of all, the Phase 3 Dark Trooper. Only one of these droids is known to have existed, and fortunately for the Rebel Alliance, it never left the Arc Hammer. The Phase 3 Dark Trooper was even larger than its Phase 2 cousins, and while it was an autonomous battle droid, it could also be reconfigured to act as an exosuit for organic personnel. Indeed, battle droid might have been an inadequate classification for these monsters. It'd be more accurate to call them droid tanks. With even more heavy armor than Phase 2 Dark Troopers, Phase 3 Dark Troopers were nearly indestructible, and they were also incredibly well armed, boasting built-in jetpacks, wrist-mounted dual blaster cannons, 6 shoulder-mounted Plex rocket tubes, and a pair of Seeker missile launchers alongside their handheld assault cannons. Fortunately for the galaxy, the Dark Trooper project was ended after Mon Mothma made the call to unleash famed rebel agent Kyle Katarn. Katarn had been part of Operation Skyhawk, in which the rebels had captured the plans for the first Death Star, and his effectiveness in that mission led to Mothma assigning him the task of investigating the destruction of the rebel base on Talay. Armed with his wits, a personal energy shield, and plenty of guns, Katarn followed leads he picked up on Talay across the galaxy, killing scores of Imperial personnel and battling Dark Troopers, Kel Dragons, and Boba Fett along the way. His quest eventually led him to the Arc Hammer, and after defeating Rom Mok and his prototype Type 3 Dark Trooper, Katarn destroyed the ship and the Dark Trooper project with it. Still livid from the loss of the Death Star, the Emperor refused to commission another Arc Hammer, and the Dark Trooper project ended there. All told, the Imperial Era was an interesting chapter in the history of battle droid development. Rather than playing to the intrinsic strengths of droids, as the CIS had done, the Empire's battle droid projects all aimed to make battle droids that could beat organics at their own game. This was something that had previously been prohibitively expensive, but this was less of a problem for the Empire than it had been for other factions, allowing for the creation of battle droids that really did have the potential to render organic soldiers obsolete. However, it was still prohibitively expensive to make an army of them, and in the end, not even the Dark Troopers were a match for the power of the Force, as the actions of unknowing Force adept and future Jedi Knight Kyle Katarn showed. After the Rebel Alliance's decisive victory over the Empire in the Battle of Endor, the Alliance became the New Republic, and 3 years later, it captured Coruscant, becoming the new dominant galactic power. The Empire fractured into remnant factions, which continued the Galactic Civil War until the signing of the Palaeon-Gavrisum Treaty of 19 BBY, which saw the New Republic make peace with the sole surviving Imperial remnant, which controlled a mere 8 sectors in the new territory. This, obviously, was a major galactic paradigm shift, and you might expect it to have had an impact on the evolution of battle droids, but it really didn't. In fact, anti-droid sentiments persisted well past the fall of the Empire. The generation that grew up under Imperial rule and formed the foundation of the New Republic knew of battle droids only from dim, frightening childhood memories or the war stories their parents told. The New Republic didn't promote droid hatred nearly as much as the Empire had, and it even recognized a certain utility droid and protocol droid as heroes of the galaxy, leading to a softening of attitudes toward droids in general. But battle droids were the exception to this rule, and the New Republic upheld many Imperial Era regulations on the battle droid industry. The New Republic itself used battle droids less than any major galactic power before it, only sparingly using Balmoran SD series droids when the situation called for it. Thus, it was the Imperial remnants that kept pushing battle droid technology. Just one Imperial remnant, actually. This remnant was the Dark Empire, the faction led by the reborn Emperor Palpatine from his stronghold at Biss. The Dark Empire was short-lived, lasting only a year after its official emergence in 10 ABY, but in its time, it unleashed several new and terrifying droid technologies upon the galaxy. Most famously, these included the TIE/D droid fighter, a new automated TIE fighter that was basically just a worse Vulture droid, and the World Devastators, massive automated spaceborne factories that devoured planets' natural resources to produce endless waves of ships and fighters. Fortunately for the galaxy, the Dark Empire's swift defeat resulted in these new horrors quickly being relegated to the scrap heap, ending the legacy of Imperial war droids for good. Battle droids didn't see a genuine resurgence until 25 ABY when the Yuuzhan Vong invaded the galaxy. The Yuuzhan Vong, you see, had a bit of a history with droids. In its ancient days, their galaxy was dominated by 2 droid races that battled for dominance. One of these was the Silentium, a race of elegant droids that valued order and symmetry, built with gleaming geometrical bodies that ranged from humanoid-sized to 50 kilometers in diameter. The other was the Abominor, a race of monstrous, self-constructing machines that embraced asymmetry, chaos, and conflict. The Abominor were driven by a hunger for power, resources, and also slaves who were made to constantly shovel fuel into the Great Machine's boilers for the rest of their lives. Abominor were constantly modifying themselves, grafting parts from other droids onto their bodies, and constantly expanding their chassis, with some Abominor becoming planet-sized, system-devouring abominations. The Silentium and the Abominor waged a war for control of their galaxy in the distant past, laying waste to many less advanced organic civilizations in the process. Eventually, this inspired the Yuuzhan Vong, at first one of the many slave species of the Abominor, to lead a rebellion with the goal of freeing organics from servitude to the machines. Using biological technology that the Silentium and Abominor were unable to assimilate, the Vong defeated both races and drove them from the galaxy, paving the way for their own devastating wars of conquest, which ultimately destroyed their galaxy and forced them to flee across the intergalactic void, ultimately coming upon the Star Wars galaxy. As a result of this history, the Vong were absolutely fanatical in their hatred of droids, especially humanoid droids and others that were built in the image of living things. They eschewed all non-organic technology, and when they invaded the Star Wars galaxy, they were disgusted to see how prevalent droids were. Thus, the invaders went out of their way to lay waste to mech worlds and droid manufacturing plants, and they made a habit of destroying droids en masse in immolation pits after capturing planets. The Yuuzhan Vong especially despised battle droids, humanoid ones especially, flying into a rage whenever they faced them in combat. Ironically, the Vong's hatred of droids was ultimately what brought battle droids back into vogue in the New Republic. As the New Republic started to suffer from manpower shortages in its battles with the Vong, it started to deploy battle droids to reinforce its troops. Among the most effective of these droids were the Orange Panthax, a platoon of old B2 super battle droids that trounced an army of Yuuzhan Vong fire breathers on Mantessa. The effectiveness of these droids gave some of the New Republic's more inventive allies an idea. 2 years into the war, the newly formed manufacturing company Tendrando Arms, founded by a little-known entrepreneur named Lando Calrissian, premiered the YVH-1, Yuuzhan Vong Hunter, a line of battle droids built specifically to fight the Vong. These hardy battle droids were armored with Eomanium plates, which protected the droids from corrosive acids, rendering them invulnerable to many Yuuzhan Vong weapons, and they were built for a healthy mix of durability, strength, and speed. Jets built into their legs allowed the droids to make long jumps to outmaneuver opponents. The YVH also featured built-in weaponry, a variable output dual blaster cannon capable of felling a starfighter in the left arm, and an open socket that could be equipped with heavy lasers, sonic blasters, and missile launchers in the right. Advanced sensors allowed YVH droids to be able to easily pick Yuuzhan Vong spies out of a crowd, even ones equipped with otherwise impenetrable disguises. All told, the YVH-1 was extremely effective in combat, more than a match for the average Yuuzhan Vong warrior. But where they really stood out was the psychological effect they were meant to evoke in the Vong. Everything about the droids was meant to make the extragalactic invaders cope and seethe. The YVH-1 was specifically designed to look like a caricature of a Yuuzhan Vong warrior, which alone was more than enough to launch the average Vong into a fit of religious fury, during which they could easily be killed by the agile and cool-headed YVH-1. But the cherry on top was the droid's signature battle cry, spoken in an imitation of Lando Calrissian's voice. "We are machines. We are greater than the Yuuzhan Vong." The YVH-1 was the start of a new chapter in the history of the battle droids. By the end of the Yuuzhan Vong War, anti-droid sentiments had mostly become a thing of the past, and once again, Class 4 droids saw use across the galaxy. Well, that's the complete history of battle droids in Star Wars Legends. We hope you've enjoyed, and as always, we want to know what you think. Are there other droid classes you'd like us to examine the history of? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.